So one of the biggest casualties of this current generation we're sort of putting an end to has been the survival horror genre. Ever since, I guess Xbox and especially 360, we just haven't seen that many horror games. And it's really disappointing to see. I'm a huge fan of the Resident Evil, Silent Hills of this world. And to be honest, ever since maybe the first Condemned on 360 back on launch, I haven't really played a horror game that's really, enthralled me and dragged me in.
Wow, that's going back a long way.
We're going back.
We're talking launch games.
We're talking launch, 2006, or 5 even.
I mean, there've been some great survival horror and just straight horror games. Things like Fear kind of touched on horror in a really nice way.
Fear scares me too much. I don't even want to think about Fear.
But you're right. I mean, Resident Evil, it's kept trying to deliver, but because it inspired games that really took those mechanics in a much more action-orientated way, and it's been hard for them to kind of reclaim that. Obviously, Gears of War is a really good example of a game that was really heavily influenced by Resident Evil 4, and it pushed that mechanic so far away from survival horror that it was kind of difficult to bring it all back again.
Yeah.
This, however, might have a chance.
Yeah, Evil Within, this is one I'm really, really excited about. So it's from the granddaddy of survival horror games, Shinji Mikami, obviously creator of Resident Evil. His last Resident Evil was Resident Evil 4, which is still one of the sort of greatest games in my opinion, obviously out on Xbox Live now, but he's returning to survival horror. Couldn't be more excited. I mean, this just looks horrible in all of the best ways. It looks really grim, really gory, and you're basically playing as this detective who's called in to investigate a murder at a mental institute. Goes in, finds everyone's dead, all his cops are missing, and then he gets knocked out and sort of hung up upside down by a crazy butcher.
It's not really the way you want to start the day.
That's a bad Saturday. So yeah, this place just looks horrible, and that's sort of the perfect environment for a horror game, isn't it?
You want somewhere that just looks as grim as possible. I mean, I guess I'm looking at this, it's reminding me a little bit of a couple of little segments in Tomb Raider.
Okay,
just
really?
Really nasty looking places, just gore dripping off the walls.
Those places. Yeah.
Places. Because there were some nice little elements of survival horror in that game, I think.
Yeah, no, really, it's really good.
Wasn't the main focus though. I mean, I feel like in this game, you're always going to feel like you could be killed by something around the next corner at any moment.
They're doing really nice work to make it as cinematic as possible. We saw a little bit of this in Resident Evil 4, but I don't know if you can see it on this particular video, but they've basically widescreened it, so you get the black bars along the top just to sort of give you that cinematic angle. The idea is you can never really see the entire screen, so your feet are always out of view, or your sort of what's above you's out of view, so you're always
that nice sort of claustrophobic feeling.
Nice claustrophobic tunnel vision, and it's a really small but integral detail to sort of the amount of thought and process they're putting into this game. And you know what, it looks like something new, and I know that's weird to say considering who's making it and the fact that it is such a homage to old games, but it does just look so refreshing.
We should probably talk a little bit about that heritage, because it does have a really great gaming heritage.
Yeah, totally. So it was actually a really interesting, this came from an interview out of TGS, where Mikami basically said the reason Resident Evil went so off the rails, essentially, and away from what defined it, was because the Resident Evil 1 remake on GameCube sold so terribly that it just disheartened the whole team, and they thought, right, if you want action, we'll give you action. And obviously that gave us Resident Evil 4, and from there the whole thing's sort of spiraled out of control. I mean, personally, I wasn't a huge fan of Resi 5 or 6, but are you in the same sort of...
Yeah, I mean, I really enjoyed Resident Evil 4. I felt like 5 and 6 did take it those extra few steps away, and maybe there was something just about the freshness of Resident Evil 4 that kind of took everyone a little bit by surprise. It was just so different that it just felt really, really cool. But as I say, the mechanics kind of got taken away by other franchises, by other titles, improved upon, developed, and that never really happened with Resident Evil. So it would be nice to kind of come back a few steps to the sort of traditional values of survival horror that games like Resi kind of set up, and Silent Hill and things like that. I mean, Silent Hill, I think, continues to do a pretty decent job.
Silent Hill does okay. I think Silent Hill has always struggled to recapture its brilliance. I mean, even after 2, it's been years since we've had a real good core Silent Hill experience, and I think even the sort of HD remakes of 2 have made me realize personally just how difficult it is to create a game like that, and it's so of the time and of the moment, that going back to it's difficult, which is why I'm so intrigued by this. It's the Resident Evil game that we've basically been wanting for years and years, and now Capcom's not doing it. It's Bethesda publishing it and Studio Tango Works that are developing it. And it's really exciting. And, it's got all of Mikami's sort of trademarks. You've got the gore just dripping off the walls. You've got the huge dude with a chainsaw. Like, what else do you want from your horror game?
Is it also kind of part of that this really cool kind of Japanese upstart developer movement that's happening? Kind of really kicked into gear with Platinum Games, with Bayonetta,
of course,
and Vanquish. And this feels very much within that kind of tradition of these great developers who have broken away from the big publishers they were working with, trying to do something on their own and independent, going back to what made them excited about making games in years gone by, on not going back to the last generation, but the generation before, the Xbox and the PS2. And they're trying to come up with something for Xbox One that's really pushing things forward. But it does have these really great kind of classic values.
See, now, the thing that interests me about games like this that are sort of pushing genre or pushing new genres forward into next gen especially, is these are always big, like, tests of sort of buying power. So almost I see, for example, Condemned and Fear didn't sell fantastically, and from there we didn't see a lot of horror games come after that. Do you think this will have the same impact on next gen if Evil Within, which is coming early 2014, doesn't have a huge sort of critical or commercial reception? Is that the end of horror for a couple of years?
I'd hate to see that happen. I really feel like there's a hunger for this. I think the fact we're seeing so many great horror movies recently would suggest that there is an appetite for scares. Whether they be in the cinema or at home. Timing's good. Early 2014, just after the launch, the big games have come out. Hopefully there's a little window there to kind of jump in with something a little bit different, change of pace. This slightly slower, more intimidating kind of atmosphere.
Yeah, totally. I mean, speaking of change of pace, I mean, this game, while it happily presents itself as this real sort of slow, horrific shooter horror game, it does actually have some shooting elements, which this trailer does get to in a second, which shows sort of Mikami's willingness to explore his heritage. So the main game is presented as like this Resident Evil 1-2 sort of style game, and then before long it sort of switches into this action-heavy Resi 4 sort of mashup, and I'm really excited by that personally. Because as much as I love the sort of slow, plodding pace of survival horror games, I do like a bit of sort of on the hip shooting, and just getting that real pack of a revolver in your hand while you're tearing down really scary and horrible looking enemies.
Yeah, I mean, what we're seeing here is just pretty epic stuff for what at first seemed like quite a small, slow survival horror game. And here we're going to have a look at some of this action.
So we're coming up to a completely different environment, and we've already seen in previews how the whole game's warping around you, so we're not really sure why that's happening just yet. But for example, you're running down a corridor and you're shooting some dudes, and then you turn around to go back from where you've come from, you turn around and you're outside suddenly. Like, it's just this real sort of mind-bending experience, and you have to wonder whether that's sort of an effect of the asylum or whether there's a gretter power at work. And you never know with Mikami, because he always has a sort of tendency to blend the supernatural with the reality, and I know that's something I'm a big fan of. But just this place looks horrible. Like the sterile sort of blood-soaked sort of combination is pretty bad in the asylum, but then just look at this house.
This sort of dingy stone house. Yeah, I mean, he was going down that staircase into the basement. We know that's a bad idea.
I mean, it just, you got these guys, they got knives and stuff sticking out of their faces. That's not cool. I don't want to see that. He's already having the worst day ever. And you look at the trailers and there's that girl with the like 8 arms coming out of her. I don't want that. Just, this guy's probably just going to get a cup of coffee, and now he's just embroiled in this horrible massacre.
He looks very well dressed. I mean, he's probably going out for a nice dinner.
Maybe a nice dinner.
Hard day at work.
Yeah.
And now his holster on. Always go to dinner with your holster.
Never leave the home without it. Good advice. But yeah, just look at this guy. I feel really sorry for him because, just look at all those guys.
That's a bad sign. You don't want to look out the window and see that. I mean, this is actually reminding me very much of the opening of Resident Evil 4.
Yeah.
Walking into that village and the infected coming towards the door.
And then you get the ladders coming up through the windows. And, I think that's going to be similar here. We can see the setting traps, which is pretty nice. So it's giving you a real sort of, again, you're on the back foot all the time, and you're always sort of being antagonized. And I think it's interesting because survival horror games, even though you're often pitted against really terrible odds, you often feel quite empowered over the enemies, and especially in zombie games because they're so mindless. But
yeah, absolutely.
I think it's really interesting for a game to just really put you in these horrible situations with these enemies clearly look more intelligent and more powerful than your sort of typical living dead.
Yeah.
And that's pretty horrible. I mean, they're just wrapped in barbed wire and just,
Yeah.
disgusting.
You can sort of see here as well, you've got that kind of the stop and shoot mechanic
Yep.
that Resident Evil really tried to make work. I think some people got a little bit annoyed at that over time. They wanted to be able to move and shoot. But I do feel like stopping and shooting is integral to that horror element.
Yep.
Not being able to see all the way around you, being limited in your movement. It's like a risk reward in terms of trying to fight back and keep fighting and survive the game.
Totally. I think, you know what, as we approach sort of 2014, there's a couple of games that are really sort of high on my radar, and this is one of them, just purely because it's doing something that we haven't seen for such a long time that it feels new. And it's such a ridiculous thing to say, but I'm excited. I think it's going to be fantastic for Xbox One, and I'm excited to see more.